Hi. For the past decade, my country has been fighting a deadly war on drugs that has led to destruction and that has worsened most of the problems that it was intended to solve in the first place. I'm sure you know, because you have heard the news and because many people before me have come here to talk to you about all of the social, economic, and political impacts of the war on drugs, not only in my country, but in the entire Latin America. So I'm not going to take my time here in front of you to tell you and to repeat all of those numbers, but I will rather share my story, because what I want you to understand today is how a citizen like me, a regular girl like me that never dreamt of being an advocacy for either drug policy reform or decriminalization, has actually ended up doing this work in the face of the need and in the face of the tragedy. So I'm going to tell you my story, and it starts back in 1984 when I was born in Mexico City, and I never dreamt of living in a country at war. During an entire decade, I was raised and had a happy, normal childhood in Mexico City. And I'm sure you didn't hear much about us back then as you hear right now about us, because most of the news that you will see about Mexico's drug cartels or insecurity problems back in the 80s were like this. So it was about one cartel that may or may have not killed 4 people. It was not about the massive destruction that we're seeing now. So back in the 90s, I was still having a very happy childhood, and I was living in that monster city called Mexico City, which paradoxically was about to become the safest city in the country after being seen as the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous cities in the world. It was about to become one of the safest. And the reason why it became one of the safest is because the entire country became more dangerous than the city itself. And it did because of the policy responses my government took in terms of drugs. In the 90s, I started going to high school, and it was a very exciting time to live in Mexico because we were about to transition to democracy. We were about to sign the North American Free Trade Agreement and become this massively open economy. And we were struggling to get more rights. It was not an easy time. We were still fighting. We had guerrilla in the south of the country. We were fighting economic crisis. We were actually fighting for more rights. But it was an exciting time for a girl like me to become an activist, and so I did. And I joined the human rights movement, and I started to fight for the right causes. You know, you name it, sexual and reproductive health and rights. I joined the HIV/AIDS global response, and I started to fight for public health causes. But what happened, and I didn't know it was about to happen, it was about to change like this fast, is that while having to face some policy issues, while trying to reach people who use drugs, when I was still fighting the HIV/AIDS pandemic, I never, ever, ever imagined that I was about to find so many policy problems behind 1, drug use, and 2, drug policies around the world. What I first realized when I was joining the HIV response is that drug users were seen then, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they're still seeing now as the epitome of the undeserving. Drug users do that to themselves, and therefore they should suffer, and they're not people that deserve to have any sort of intervention or service or attention from the state. And so what I did to overcome that challenge at the very beginning of my career, without knowing that I was going to become this activist in favor of drug decriminalization and drug policy reform in general, was to adopt the harm reduction paradigm. So harm reduction was developed here in Europe, so thank you very much for that. And it was about all of these interventions for people that couldn't stop or didn't want to stop using drugs, but still they didn't want to get infected with other diseases, or they didn't want to have other problems or conflicts with the law. And so I took back that approach to Mexico, and I started figuring out how could we reduce the harms associated to drugs, but also the harms associated with drug policy. What I didn't know is that in 2006, my president, President Calderón, was going to declare a war on drugs that was going to leave a lethal toll. So what am I talking about when I talk about the war on drugs that is destroying my country? Well, we're talking about an exceptional regime that has been built around this drug rhetoric, authorizing the passing of laws that are actually limiting fundamental freedoms and that are taking a militarized response to public security and a militarized response to what I consider to be a public health problem. Homicides have skyrocketed in my country with over 140,000 people killed. Human rights violations had increased in 1,900%. You name the institution, all of them have incurred into massive human rights violations, and we still have 20,000 people disappear and 300,000 people being internally displaced in a country that calls itself a democratic regime and in a country that doesn't consider to be at war. So if you see these numbers, you tell me, are we or are we not at war? During this past decade, what has happened is that by authorizing the criminal justice system to deal with a public health problem, we had increased our prison population, but we had put in jail loads of people that have nothing to do with the drug cartels, with organized crime, or with the insecurity that we're facing at the moment. We're pretty much arresting consumers and possessors of substances that were declared illegal somewhere around 15 years ago. So the movement that I joined is actually trying to resist these bad policies because we know that at the very end, the drug war is not about a war on drugs, it's a war on people, but it's also a war on fundamental rights, freedoms, and liberties. So we don't want to live in a state of exemption. So what I did is that I joined a bunch of NGOs that are working in Mexico by doing mainly three things. One, we're trying to change public opinion by sensitizing the general public about the harms of the war on drugs and the harms of militarizing the response. Two, we're advocating or we're doing some lobbying as to change the laws that we have in Mexico that, as the title of the presentation say, we think are tearing our country apart. And three, we engaged in the first two strategic litigations that actually called the judiciary to have a legal opinion on what my government is doing wrong. And I want just to take a minute to share the case of Grace, which is the case that is actually changing public opinion in Mexico. Because when you think about drug policy, you normally think that it's all about decriminalizing use and legalizing marijuana, when it's definitely not. Drug policy reform, it's also about ensuring that people have access to the substances that they need to cure their illnesses or their symptoms. And this is a girl that had over 400 seizures a day, and she needed a medicine based on cannabis. And the government, of course, refused to give her the medicine, and we started a litigation that on October the 20th, 2015, actually succeeded to give her medicine. Grace is doing much better after having her medicine, her seizures reduced in 3/4 in just these months that she's been taking the medicine, and she's the first case of almost 150,000 cases of people that will have access to this substance in the years to come. By joining this movement and by doing this type of work, by trying to sensitize people like you, by trying to convene the message that, as it was said yesterday, being the catalyst for change can be a very lonely and can also be a very exhausting work. I'm trying to invite you all to join this movement, to let us oppose and resist the war on drugs, because as I said before, the war on drugs is just a war on people, and we cannot accept that governments like mine make authoritarian reforms in the names of drugs. So I will ask you to kindly join our movement to help us help other people and to help us help other countries not to fall in this false discussion of being harsh on drugs when they're really being just harsh on human rights. Thank you very much.